Hey, what's up everybody? This is C.L.S. all-in-one. In today's video, I'll show you how to test the charging system and how to change an alternator in a Cadillac Escalade Ext or ESV years 2008 through 2013 with a 6.2-liter Vortec V8 engine. And this video may also be helpful for a few other vehicles that feature the same 6.2-liter engine, such as Tahoes and Yukons. So when I started my Escalade today, I was greeted with a service battery charging system message, which means the battery is not being charged properly, and more than likely the alternator is the issue. But before I go ahead and remove it, I will test the charging system first to confirm what the issue is. And before you begin testing, you should make sure your battery has a decent charge first, because the electrical system may be running just off the battery power if the alternator is not working, which will drain the battery really fast. And with my vehicle, I do happen to have two batteries that I have already charged with a battery charger, so I'm ready to begin testing. So located right here on the passenger side of the engine firewall is a high amperage mega fuse that sometimes goes bad, which can disable your charging system. And this can be checked fairly easy with the use of a multimeter or a test light, which I will demonstrate now. So right here, with the engine off, I'm using a 12-volt test light, with the ground wire connected to the negative side of the battery. Now I will make contact on the right side of the fuse with the test light, and as you can see here, it lights up, which indicates the fuse is working properly. But if you are unable to get this fuse to light up with a test light, this would mean that the fuse is bad and needs replaced. And if you do need to search for this part, this is called a mega fuse, and on this vehicle, this has a 175 amp rating. Now I will show you how to use a multimeter to check this same fuse. So this is just a cheap multimeter that is set to 20 volts on the DC volt side, with two leads, black and red. The black lead will need to make contact with the negative side on the battery, and the red lead needs to make contact with the right side of the fuse. And as you can see here, it reads 12 volts, which indicates the fuse is working. But if you do end up with a very low reading on this side, such as 0, that means the fuse is more than likely bad and needs replaced. It would also be a good idea to check the cable that connects directly to the alternator, which is this cable right here. So if you follow this cable, you will find that it connects to the back of the alternator right here. So now I will go ahead and test the voltage at this connection. So using the same multimeter, I will need to make contact with a good grounding point using the black lead. Then with the red lead, I will make contact with the end of this cable where it connects to the alternator. And it looks like the voltage here is reading right at 12 volts, which means this cable is fine. So now I know I have a good connection from my battery to the alternator. Now it's time to start the vehicle and test the voltage output from the alternator. So once again, I'm using a multimeter with the dial set at 20 on the DC voltage side. Now I will take the black lead and make contact with the negative battery terminal, and with the red lead, I'll make contact with the positive battery terminal. Now let's take a look at the multimeter, and it looks like I have a reading of just 12 volts, which is not good. The alternator should have a charging output to the battery ranging anywhere from 13 to 15 volts when the engine is running, so it appears the alternator is not working. Now it's time to turn the vehicle off and begin removing the alternator. And the first step is going to be disconnecting the battery or batteries. And when disconnecting a car battery, you should disconnect the negative cable first, then the positive cable. Next, the engine cover can be removed by lifting up on the front first. Then the cover can be pulled forward, and it should pop right out. Now the cable on the back of the alternator can be removed with a 10mm socket or wrench. Then the wire harness plug can be removed by pressing the clip on the side and pulling up on the plug. And here's a look at that clip that's on the side of the plug that locks this in place. Next, I will use a 15mm socket and ratchet to turn the belt tensioner pulley clockwise, which will loosen the belt. And here's where the belt tensioner is located. So I will attach the socket to the bolt in the middle of the pulley, then push downward. And now the belt is loose and can be removed from the alternator. And if you don't happen to have a belt diagram in the engine compartment, It'd be a good idea first to take some pictures of how the belt attaches so you can make sure you can put it on the same exact way. Now it's time to loosen and remove the 2 bolts that secure the alternator using a 15mm socket and ratchet. And these bolts are kind of long threaded, so they will take a little while to remove. And once the bolt is loosened all the way, it should just pull right out. So I got 1 bolt out now, and 1 more to go. Now that the bolts are removed, I can use a pry bar to gently pry up on each side of the alternator to pop it loose. And now the alternator can be removed from the vehicle, and it's time to head to the auto parts store and grab a new one. So even though I've already tested the alternator voltage with a multimeter, it would still be a good idea to let the auto parts store bench test your alternator to confirm it is bad, which can be done at most of the major auto parts stores. And after completing the testing, we were able to confirm it was bad. And if for some reason it does work properly, you can have them test it multiple times to make sure it's not a random issue. And if it still passes the test, there may be a wiring issue with your wire harness connection for the alternator on your vehicle. And you can also have them test the new alternator as well, just to make sure it works as it should. So as you can see here, the new one has passed all the testing and is ready to be installed in the vehicle. So for my Cadillac Escalade Ext, there was 2 different alternators available, one that was 140 amps and one that was 160 amps. And I did go with the larger model just so it has some more power for all my stereo accessories. And before installing the new one, there is a couple of metal bushings on the alternator mount that can be tapped lightly with a hammer towards the front of the vehicle until they are flush on the inside of this mount. Then the alternator should slide right into position. Next, the 2 15mm bolts can be hand threaded first into position, which may require moving the alternator around slightly so it lines up with the holes. Then the bolts can be tightened with a ratchet, and these don't need to be super tight. Somewhere around 35 foot-pounds of torque should be plenty. Now the serpentine belt can be reinstalled, so I will route the belt around all of the pulleys except for this pulley shown here. Then use my ratchet with the 15mm socket to turn the belt tensioner downward, then wrap the belt around the last pulley. And here's a closer look at the belt after being mounted. It's important that the belt is in the correct position, otherwise your engine will not run properly. Now I can connect the wire harness plug, and I did notice it's a really tight fit between the plug connection and the valve cover, but it still works. Next, the power cable can be connected to the back of the alternator using the provided nut and a 10mm socket or wrench. And you just want to get this connection snug because if you over tighten this, it may break. Then once it's tightened, I can slide the rubber boot back in place. Now the battery cables are ready to be connected, and you want to start with the positive first, then the negative. And the same thing goes for the battery terminal connections. You just want to get these nice and snug and not over tighten. So the alternator installation is now complete, and it's time for a test. So let's go ahead and start this up. And it looks like the service battery charging system message is now gone, and we are good to go. And now I will go ahead and test the voltage at the battery again, just to show you what the voltage looks like with the alternator working correctly. So the same thing with a multimeter, it's set at 20 volt reading, and the black lead is making contact with the negative battery terminal, and the red lead is making contact with the positive battery terminal. And with the engine running, the battery voltage is around 15 volts, which means this alternator is working great. And finally, we're to the end of this video, and there's one last thing I forgot to do, and that's to put the engine cover back on. Okay, it's now time for me to go. If you like this video, if you could, hit that like button, and please subscribe. And have yourself a great day, and I'll see you next time.